From To Keto LLC, it's Keto Woman Podcast with Daisy Brackenhall.
Hello Keto Lovelies, I'm Daisy Brackenhall and I've spent most of my life struggling with my weight and confidence and have always had a difficult relationship with food. Even when I finally got to my target weight after weight loss surgery and eating low carb, I couldn't maintain it and I was miserable. Keto has given me the freedom to fall in love with food again without the constant gain, loss, guilt, virtue cycle of before. Health and happiness is where it's at now, running on fat. Welcome to the Keto Woman Podcast. Each week I'll be chatting to inspirational women, maybe even a few men, to discover their secrets to success and share them with you. My first guest is Louise Reynolds. Hey Louise, thank you so much for being my first extraordinary woman. How are you today?
Hi Daisy, thank you so much for the invitation and I'm really honoured to be one of your extraordinary women on the Keto Women's Podcast. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So good to have you here. So tell the listeners a bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, you'll notice that I am from Australia. I live in Adelaide and I'm a military mum of 3 teenage boys and so who's been keto just over a year. I think I've had my keto-versary back in May this year. And like yourself, have had a very complicated relationship with food and have really discovered low carb and then into keto this last year and really am living life like yourself on fat and, feeling so much more healthier and, happier for it.
It's the best, isn't it? So you've mentioned a little bit there already, but what really does keto mean for you?
I think in a practical sense, keto for me is where I have really reduced and replaced my carbohydrates in my diet, certainly those refined carbohydrates and processed carbohydrates, certainly with healthier carbs in green leafy vegetables and really replace that with fat. So like many people who know about the food pyramid, we've done the swap. So where we had fats at the top, now fats are at the bottom of my little food pyramid. I've really certainly have not eliminated carbs particularly, but I certainly have reduced them to below 20 grams and certainly have increased my fats. And I certainly know about my protein and I keep that scaled to my lean body mass. And I can certainly talk to you through that I've actually had some DEXA scans. So, just keeping my protein moderate and eating my fats to really until I feel full.
So DEXA scans, so how dense are you then?
Oh, I am dense. So certainly that was actually quite enlightening, and I'm sure that many keto women who have lived and died by the scales will know that certainly the scales that we have, and my partner Andrew is a bit of a data junkie, and we have a Fitbit scale, so that actually not only tells you what your gross mass is, but also your body fat. And I was struggling with this stupid scales because it was telling me I was 36% body fat. And I hated this machine because, for the longest time I, was, losing weight and my body mass was staying at 36%. And I just was struggling with that number. And I ended up having a DEXA scan. And it told me I was actually 24% body fat. It
nice.
Was a revelation. I just looked at the woman and I said, "You're kidding me." And no, she said, "No, the DEXA scan, it says quite clearly here that this is your lean body mass, which was really good to know. This is your bone density. This is, your muscle mass and your fat mass, and it, down to your left leg and your right leg and your right arm and your left arm," which was absolutely just amazing. So I was actually feeling very relieved in one sense. but appalled at the technology and how it was basically lying to me this whole time.
Absolutely, yeah. Those scales were not your friend, were they?
They were not. But the explanation I got was, and I don't know how true this is, but one explanation I got was because of our electrolytes differ. So because we're not retaining, I think, our salts and our water in terms of having carbohydrates that hold that particular mass. As you know, when we start keto, we lose a lot of water, and that obviously shifts some of our electrolytes, and particularly it's about the sodium. And because the impedance scales actually regs an electrical current through your skin, and that somehow changes the way that the scales read our body mass.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. So there's actually a good reason for the fact that they're showing a distortion.
Most definitely. And so that was one explanation. So yeah, I'm not sure, how true that actually holds, but because the impedance scales go through, read or measure through some electrical current, and because of our salt electrolyte differences, the way the electrical current processes through us, and the scales measuring that, it was obviously very, very different to what was in actuality. So I'm actually relieved to be 24% body fat at the moment.
Absolutely.
And that's why when we read on, the forums and, Facebook, the scales say this, I just am a firm believer of ditch the scales. And, if you really want to know what you are, then, DEXA scans are obviously a little bit pricey, but I believe you can get scoop-ons. Do you have those? Or Groupons, vouchers for,
I've heard of it. Yeah. I'm not sure. It's definitely something I'd like to do at some point, a DEXA scan, because like you say, it's the only way to really get an accurate reading.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's good. So we first appeared on a podcast together, on the Weight Loss Surgery podcast with the Two Keto Dudes, and shared our whole weight loss surgery story on there. But what I particularly remember from that show was that you mentioned work you did with an eating disorder clinic, and I was really curious to find out a bit more about that.
So I, a little bit more about me. I am a health researcher, academic, and so part of my, my weight loss journey was, for a number of years, really struggling with my relationship with food, and particularly, I suppose, around binge eating. And that was a lot to do with obviously being an emotional eater, and there was a lot of things happening in my life at the time. And as you sort of mentioned, we appeared on podcast 52 of the Two Keto Dudes series. 52?
I think it's 52, yeah.
And leading up to the decision to have weight loss surgery, for about 3 years I was seeing a psychologist who was a clinical researcher at the university I was working for. And a lot of what we were going through was cognitive behaviour therapy, so looking at what were the triggers for the triggers around my emotions, what was my emotional state, which led me to eating. And a lot of that work was actually understanding what were those thoughts, those feelings that were associated, and then the resulting behaviour that led me to making that particular food choice. And you could see very clearly what the sequence was. I was thinking this or feeling this, and therefore I was behaving this way, and you were in that particular cycle of behaviours.
So you could map out a pattern, as it were, so you could quite clearly see. When I'm always saying to people, journal what's happening with you every day, so you can see patterns. So that's one of the things you did in therapy, was to really map out exactly what was going on.
Exactly. So there was a lot of journaling, a lot of diary entries, and, a lot of those sorts of escalations in emotions. There certainly was a lot of homework that was this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm thinking, therefore this is the behaviour. What were perhaps some redirections that were happening? So, a lot of the homework was just mind mapping and documenting that, as well as a lot of that narrative therapy as well. So the psychologist worked me through a number of activities and exercises. There was, weekly sessions, then it grew to obviously monthly, 3 monthly sessions as I was obviously working through a lot of those thoughts and feelings that was going on. There was certainly some high emotions connected with the relationship breakdown of my marriage at the time. We were moving into family court, of course. There was lots of family related issues that was going on, and obviously a lot of, as what Dr. Phil would say in pop psychology, having the party in my mouth to make me feel better, which saw me gain weight unhealthily to quite a big, I was going to say big size, but that I got close to 300 pounds, which is about 100 and nearly close to 140 kilos. So,
because I seem to remember you said before that you didn't have too much of a struggle with maintaining your weight when you were younger.
No,
it was only a bit later that you started gaining weight.
Yeah, at the end of my marriage, and obviously through the escalations through family court and things like that. That's when it certainly, there was a period of about 5 to 7 years of the weight gain. But the psychology that happened certainly before the surgery was instrumental, I believe, for the success of my surgery and after that. So,
right.
And that's where I really take issue a lot with what we read on Facebook when people talk about weight loss surgery being drastic and barbaric. And I know that Zoe Hardcombe actually mentioned that the other day on her tweet. And that, where people sort of think that we take the easy way out. And that's really where, actually for me, it was a 3-year decision or a 3-year process leading up to. Yes, it's quite a radical thing, but it certainly was having exhausted, emotionally exhausted a lot of options and opportunities, and it was a well thought out and researched decision.
So what were the real useful things that you took from that time in therapy? What were some of the practical tools that they gave you with how to deal with this process that you mentioned, this mapping out of what happens with the link between emotions and eating? What tools did you get to deal with that?
I think what was some of the really great tools were the homework activities and the exercises, and just even if you map out, I am feeling this. And I think what that is vocabulary. We need to increase our vocabulary beyond just feeling happy, sad and mad and bad. And we need to sort of go, well, actually, I'm not feeling happy, sad, bad or bad, but I might be, geez, I'm concerned about something, or I'm frustrated with that, or I'm intrigued by that. So I think naming our feelings beyond happy, sad, mad and bad was one thing. Connecting that to that thought, that feeling to that feeling makes me think this, and what is that thinking and where is that thinking derived, from? And sometimes unpacking that thinking really uncovers, that's a little bit not quite healthy. That's not a good thought, or that's not a helpful thought. And unpacking a lot of the thought processes, which can be either black and white thinking, it's obviously not helpful thoughts, that's that catastrophic sort of thinking, catastrophizing thinking. So there are different thinking patterns that we are very practiced in, and it's those sorts of habitual patterns that we go to, particularly when we're under stress, and how that then leads us to consoling, particularly me, in food. So a lot of the food choices that we were doing was obviously, the chocolates or the ice cream, buckets of ice cream, 6 or 7 pieces of toast, while I'm cooking dinner. But there was a lot of...
it really sounds to me like one of the overriding things was that you were being made aware that they were encouraging a mindfulness and awareness of what's going on. And when you had an urge to eat something, you were being aware of what that feeling was. And then, like you were saying, unpacking it a bit and going back to seeing what all those emotions were about, rather than what you probably did before. I certainly know it's what I've always done, is that emotion comes up. I don't want to feel that emotion, so I'm going to push it back down with food. Whereas you were being encouraged to just suspend that leap from emotion to food and think into those feelings a bit.
Yep. So not jumping from the end point, which was the behaviour, which was the consoling myself in food. It was like, well, I know that I want to do that, and I'm mindful of that decision has just popped into my head. Let's take 2 steps back. So what is it that I'm feeling? And then what is the thought connected to that feeling? So, it was about taking the time, and you've used the word mindfulness, and that came a lot more in vogue a little bit later on. But taking the 2 steps back to understand what are those triggers. But in saying that, that was one aspect, one part of the toolkit was looking at and recognising that unhelpful thinking, which was connected to obviously a range of emotions, not just being overwhelmed and being sad, because there was a certain level of anxiety and depression that went along with that. But the narrative therapy was really good, immersing myself into just scribbling down a lot of those random thoughts of why and how and what's happening to me. And in a non sort of judgmental way, I could unload a lot of the emotions onto a piece of paper. And
so so narrative therapy, that's basically journaling, is writing out everything that you're feeling that's happened. Yeah.
And it's just like a big sort of emotional dump on a page, and you're writing to no one in particular. It doesn't have to be Dear Diary, but it's just about obviously some kind of emotional release, and
you're getting it out rather than keeping it in.
So I think the third thing would be just general stress management techniques and being kind to yourself and taking time for yourself. That was something that was really particularly hard for a single parent, and I was single parenting a child with special needs and working full time, and at that time I was doing my PhD. So there was a lot of things on my plate that were very stressful, and obviously in the background there was as I was, the unraveling of my marriage and then family court stuff. So
it's more really all they could do was try and help you manage your stress. They can't reduce it because it was there. There's no arguing with that. But you found some useful tools to try and reduce the impact?
Oh, most definitely. So, there was obviously things, developing skills developing in my toolkit to manage what was a very stressful part of my life. So very grateful and very thankful for the skillfulness of my therapist. And that's 3 years leading up to my surgery. I continued to get therapy 2 years after my surgery as well. So
what were some of the things that you found that did work for reducing stress? Because I know it's something that affects so many people.
So I think that, again, is you're using the word mindfulness of, what is the stress and how that manifests in yourself, and doing body scans. I don't know if you know that sort of term. It's just basically just sort of, sitting back and, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? Just doing that scan from head to toe of,
I see, right. So a mental scan.
Correct.
Yeah.
And you might notice it you're holding it in your shoulders, or you're holding it, in your chest, or you're holding, in your breathing particularly. So that was one particular technique, and that was very useful to obviously, I know that I need to take some time for me, and time management and, all that balance, taking time for yourself, and really connecting with those things that to help relax and reduce that sort of inner tension.
Yeah, that sounds good. So it's really identifying where physically it's in your body so that you can literally help yourself by trying to ease that with whatever it is, some kind of loosening up exercise or breathing it out or whatever it is, but really identifying it and being aware of where it is and helping release it, rather than, obviously, if you're not doing that, it gets locked in and you can end up with shoulder pain or neck pain or whatever it is, however it manifests. Yeah.
And I think at that time, certainly afterwards, we moved away from the cognitive behaviour therapy in terms of obviously identifying what those trigger, feelings, thoughts and behaviours were, and really having had, a well managed in terms of the binge eating, certainly after surgery, and it moved more into a supportive counselling role. So a lot
Absolutely.
of the role that the therapist took after surgery was around supportive therapy, therapeuticness or therapy in that way that it really was about, how are things going and checking in and certainly.
But the point is, you'd got yourself to a really good place of readiness to have the surgery, and then from that point onwards, it became a supportive role. But you'd really done some good work before.
Correct.
You had the surgery.
Yeah. Most definitely. And, I'm eternally grateful for the relationship that I built with this particular therapist. And I know that that's not always the case with people who haven't found a really good fit with their therapist. But where I may be different from other people is I certainly am having researched, certainly I think I told this story on our podcast, that I went to a number of different surgeons with journal articles, and I had highlighted and I had post-it notes and I had all these questions having, from the literature, just so I could be taken seriously. So for this particular therapist, I had researched the eating disorders therapy research group, and so it was almost like I was interrogating him in our first session. It's like, well, why should I be with you? So it's just like, okay, yeah. What model are you using? Now, why is that the one? Where is your evidence for this?
It's like you said, a lot of people, they don't necessarily find a therapist they can work for. A lot of people actually don't necessarily want to work with or aren't ready to work with a therapist in the first place. But I seem to remember also that you mentioned that you got a lot out of the work of Gretchen Rubin, who I think is best known for her book, The Happiness Project. But tell me a bit about that, because that shows how someone can get some help from something as easily as just buying a book and being inspired by somebody. You don't have to go down necessarily the therapy route to get some really good insight.
No, and you're right. And the work of Gretchen Rubin, as you're right, and that led me from the Happiness Project, which I thought was absolutely wonderful, where if people haven't read Gretchen's Happiness Project, it's a bit like Eat, Love, Pray, Elizabeth Gilbert's book, where Gretchen, over 1 year, decides to work on happiness, where she says she's not unhappy, but she wants to find what are the sources of happiness. So for each month of the year, she goes through and she focuses on one area of her life. So she works through her kids, her husband, her house, her job, and her other activities. So she goes from January to December. Where that led Gretchen was to her second book, which was Better Than Before. And so she focuses then a lot on her behaviours, and in particular habits. And she develops up a model which she calls the 4 tendencies. And these 4 tendencies are around how you respond to external or internal accountabilities or expectations. And she categorises them into 4 different types of people. And why that's relevant is, first of all, I'll tell you those 4, which is you are either an upholder, so you can be either an internal and external accountabilities or expectations, or an obliger, so where you meet external or other people's expectations, or you can be a rebel. You can just sort of go, well, that's just not happening for me, and you can stick it up your jumper. But it'll depend on which jumper you want to choose, that sort of thing. So you can rebelize it that way. Or you can be, the fourth category is a questioner. So why should I do that? So naturally, I am an obliger. So I need to have external accountabilities, which is why I took so long to do my PhD, because I was, externalizing a lot of it, and of why I needed to finish this wretched thesis without internalizing, that I should be doing this for myself. And I really struggled with meeting deadlines, and and because I was too busy trying to meet what I thought were other people's expectations. And part of understanding where you are in these typologies is how you meet with other issues and other aspects of habits. And one of which was a light bulb moment for me was understanding you can moderate certain aspects of your behaviour, or you need to abstain. And I need to be an abstainer because I can't moderate, say, trigger aspects of my behaviours, such as chocolate. And that's really where, when I'm looking at how I respond to food, I need to not have it in my house. So if I have it in my house, then I'm an all or nothing personality.
Same here. And that whole just eat everything in moderation. Yeah, okay.
What rubbish. And my GP, my general practitioner, or PCP, primary care physician, says, yeah, I'm a moderation person. And I'm thinking, yeah, and how did that serve me at nearly 140 kilos? Moderation did not work for me. So I need to understand, in mastering my habits in being an obliger, external accountability, I need to have an accountability person. So who am I accountable to? And we work together to do that. So if you need to set me a deadline, then set me a deadline, and I need to respond to that. So, and it needs to be all or nothing. So it's got to be firm and set, because I can't moderate my workload. So it'll be done the night before. So yeah, as all good deadline undergraduate students do. But it needs to happen that way. But becoming aware and enlightened that way through Gretchen's model, and you can take her quiz is online. Highly recommended. It's just a short quiz to understand what your tendency is, and it's quite an enlightening.
I was going to say, sometimes these quizzes are enlightening because you think you know which type you're going to be before you do the quiz, but it doesn't always necessarily work out that way. Sometimes it'll illuminate different things about you that you weren't quite aware of, that when someone points out, you think, okay, maybe, maybe I'm a bit like that too. Yeah. It sounds like you've learnt a lot through these few years. I was thinking, if there was one thing you could go back and tell your younger self, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think if I reflect back and talk to my younger self, I think it would be just be kind to yourself. And that self-love and self-kindness, I really could have done, certainly through my late 20s and early 30s, when, like many women, we struggle with meeting what we think are, these expectations of others, and, whether it's mother-in-laws or sister-in-laws or our own mothers, our relationships with our sisters and particularly our husbands. Not so much our ex-husbands, but we'll move on from that. And, certainly being kind to yourself, and that self-love, taking time out for yourself is so important. Yeah, just give yourself a big hug.
And how would you get your younger self to listen to that message? Because I know I've thought about this question. I've thought of so many things I'd like to tell my younger self, but I also know how stubborn my younger self was and very unlikely to listen. So knowing what you know about yourself, how would you get her to listen?
I'm just wondering whether you need a tattoo or something permanent.
Yeah.
Can you etch it on my forehead? I don't know. That's a really great question too, because I think the thing was, you're right. I was, like my mum would say, like a bull in a china shop. I was raring to go. Maybe it's just the fiery redhead, ranger, ginger ninja that I am. I was full steam ahead and in my 20s, and I knew what I was doing and where I was going, and this was my career path. I don't know whether I needed just a big slap in the face, or I don't know.
A slap in the face and then a hug.
Yeah.
Perhaps that would have done it.
Mixed messages. What is it about you? You always ask these awkward questions.
I do. I do have a bit of a reputation for that, don't I? If you remember back in the Two Keto Dudes Facebook page, I was often remarked upon that I was asking awkward questions, and I can remember a couple of people saying, "Why can't you just accept that's the way it is?" Hell no. Could that, that's just not me. I like to dig around. If I get an idea or a theory that I think sounds great, I like to really dig around and test it. And I set the bar now with Tim Noakes and what he did in the first serial killers film, where you see him ripping pages out of his book, throwing them in the bin and saying, I got it wrong. I was the expert in this field and I got it all wrong. And he's discussed elsewhere how you need to always challenge your theories and your belief system to make sure that they've got strong foundations. And that's the gold standard for me now. So yeah, I'm basically nosy, and I was that child that was, but why?
And I think, I remember, I think we joined the Two Keto Dudes Facebook around the same time, and we had many lively discussion, and you were asking those awkward questions, but it was great because you were quite engaging, and you certainly were digging and asking, and hopefully I remember a few times I was responding to very long threads of yours with research. You were saying but why, and I posted a few links and those sorts of things. But I think it would be fantastic that you'll be on the Keto Women's podcast now, asking hopefully a lot of extraordinary women curious about women's issues and their journeys, and I think you've got the right attitude with asking us women these awkward questions. So thank you for taking this on. This is fantastic.
Well, it's beyond exciting, and I just cannot wait to really get my teeth in. It's been so great finding out more about you. We're friends and we know each other reasonably well, but sometimes it's great to get into these deeper conversations and really dig around and find out interesting things about extraordinary women. I love it. And this is what the show's all about. I want to share these great stories with the listener, but I want you, the listener, to get involved. I want to hear what topics you want covered, what seemingly awkward questions you want answers to. What are those things that are driving your curiosity? So really, really would like you to get engaged and get in touch with the Two Keto Dudes and post some replies on the ketogenic forums and tell me where you want this podcast to go.
Well, that sounds really exciting, and hopefully you've got a long list of extraordinary women that are lined up ready to go with the podcast. And I know that not only on the ketogenic forums that we've got some amazing stories that are shared on a daily basis there. And I also know that you certainly are very active in your Kick-Ass Keto Bitches group as well. So, and always available and asking and responding to those awkward questions that the bitchy bitches have, and shout out to them. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, a big shout out to them, because that group that was just started on a whim, really, when the Two Keto Dudes page shut down, and I realised I'd miss a certain part of the Facebook interaction. And that group has just grown to be something phenomenal for me. It is my absolute safe place, and I'm honoured that other women call it that. And I really have them, and you're a part of them, to thank for my development on this path, because I wouldn't be doing it without them, and I love them. And yeah, this podcast is for them and everyone out there who's interested in women and keto.
Fantastic, Daisy. Thanks for letting me be one of the first of the many, hopefully, extraordinary keto women that are going to be sharing their story on the podcast.
Yes, and thank you, Louise. It's been fantastic to share this first podcast with you.
Thanks, Daisy.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. To get links and information from the show, go to www.ketowomenpodcast.com. Do you want to be one of my extraordinary women? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you want to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomenpodcast.com. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to help me make more, please head over to my Patreon page at patreon.com/ketowomen, where you can make a monthly contribution and join me on this exciting adventure. You can also simply hit the support button on the website. It's thanks to the Two Keto Dudes that I'm hosting this podcast, so please consider heading to their Patreon page at patreon.2keto.com and help them bring you more podcasts like this one. For those of you who are still with me at the end of the show, I thought I'd have a special segment here just for you. Each week I'm going to look for a great quote to leave you with. This week is a line from Nora Ephron. Above all, be the heroine of your life, not the victim. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.